What is up? What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Off the Top Rope, Off the Mic Sports Network. I talked about this, and it picked up a lot more steam in the last couple of days. Obviously, Dave Meltzer, who I knock a lot, but he does have some intel of value. Um, Chris Jericho has become more of a topic of discussion because, like I said, the Instagram stuff from over the weekend. I think there was a TikTok that was out there. And then Dave Meltzer and some other people have started to speak out about, Chris Jericho's contract status with AEW. Now, let me be clear. Chris Jericho, his time in AEW has kind of run its course. Could this have been handled a little bit differently and maybe, had some more leadership in that company that maybe Chris Jericho wouldn't be at his lowest form of his career? And does he bear the brunt of some of that responsibility of what's happened? But yeah, I think Tony Khan should have known better to not give as much power as he did to Chris Jericho. Now, I know a lot of people within, the WWE fan base are not exactly, thrilled with the prospect of Chris Jericho. And I talked about this, would you welcome Chris Jericho back into WWE? I've made my opinion known of what I would want or expect from Chris Jericho. Have him return in 2026 at the Royal Rumble, have him have a WrestleMania program, have him retire, give him a Hall of Fame induction, and then, maybe, hell, if you want to keep him as an on-screen character, maybe make him a general manager. I actually think that would be really entertaining. Chris Jericho, at his core, is very entertaining. Some of the stuff that he has been doing in AEW has been some of the worst creative of all time. If he had more creative people around him and not been just relying solely on his ideas and not having other people to flesh it out, because I think this is the problem. AEW creative, there's nothing there, and there's nobody standing in the way of these people doing what they want. And I think what made Chris Jericho work was he obviously had a lot better ideas years ago, and he had people within the writing and within the creative that, kind of understood what made him work. That's why the gift of Jericho and, the list of Jericho and all those things worked. And then even the stuff in early AEW, like he has always been good to, ultimately reinvent himself and make him into, a better character. But I want to talk about this from an AEW perspective. And I know I'm going to get shit for this, and I really don't care. The idea that we're getting to the point, and listen, I know a lot of, people within AEW are just hoping and praying and already turning on Chris Jericho. But let's not lose sight of the fact that AEW is not where it is without Chris Jericho. I understand that he's a big reason why they're in the shitter right now, but all of these people advocating for Chris Jericho to go away, you would probably want him to retire. The last thing you would want to see as an AEW fan, and a lot of people don't want to admit it, is to see him go back to WWE and potentially reinvent himself, make him entertaining, give him a fun little ride. I don't expect him to get like anything significant, but if he goes back to the competition, I'm not saying this is Cody Rhodes leaving the company he founded. Chris Jericho, people don't understand or people forget that Chris Jericho is critical to where AEW was. The reason why they got the television deal. He was the first world champion in the history of that company. I don't know what's been going on behind the scenes, if there's some clash, but we haven't seen him in 4 months, and we may never see him again. And the fact, this was inevitable that this was going to happen, but given where we are, the fact that we're openly talking about this publicly now, and, given how prominent of a figure, whether you liked him or you didn't, the fact that we're having this discussion and him going back to WWE, if you're an AEW fan, you don't want Chris Jericho going back to WWE. You could praise it all you want. It is bad optics, no matter what way you want to look at it. WWE isn't going to use Chris Jericho in the same, at least I hope, they're not going to use Chris Jericho in the same way that AEW did. They're not expecting him to be a world champion. They're not expecting him. This guy is at the end of his career. He is a Hall of Famer. Get him in the Hall of Fame. Have him be give him a shock pop in the Royal Rumble. Give him a final WrestleMania match in Las Vegas, and that's it. And hey, if he wants to be on television, maybe make him a GM. I actually think that that could be kind of interesting if they wanted to go that route. But there's no way running from this that the optics of just the optics of Chris Jericho going to WWE, no matter how you feel about him and no matter how badly that this went at the end specifically in the last 2 to 3 years in AEW, one of your first major signings going out the door 6 years after signing there is not a good look. It's not a good look. And it shows you how far this company has fallen off. And I think a big reason why this company is falling into the toilet is because they gave Chris Jericho way too much power. And especially with the infrastructure that WWE does have, they would bring him back in with some sort of a plan. And it may not be much of a plan. I don't expect them, listen, they're going to have some sort of idea of what they want to do because Chris Jericho hasn't been there. John Cena, listen, they botched that heel turn. They botched his retirement run. Chris Jericho, it's not going to be a whole year. So they'll have some sort of idea of what they want to do. So could AEW have made this work? Maybe. But they overexposed him. People got tired of him. He had way too much power and way too much influence in that company, and it turned bad. And that's why this company, really, you put the faith in people like that. That's being said, WWE's fine on talent. They're not going to need to have a guy, be thrust into our faces every single week and giving him insufferable segments. That's not what this is going to be. So, listen, you AEW fans can snicker at this all you want, but the fact is, one of your major signings right out of the gate in Chris Jericho is probably going back to WWE. That's not good optics. It's not. No matter what you want to say, it's not good optics. So we'll see where this whole thing goes, but I don't expect to see him on television again until his contract's up. And it's just, it's really amazing to see how far, this guy's stock has fallen. And he deserves to, own it too. But I also think Tony Khan and the creative aspect of this company really fell off significantly and, let him run with way too much. And a lot of things got to the screen that were just downright awful. So, we'll see where the whole thing lands, man. But like I said, I expect him to be back in WWE. Am I, over the moon thrilled about it? Not really, because of, like I said, the stock for this guy is as low as it's ever been in his career. And some of that's his fault. Some of that's on AEW, but where this goes, who knows? But to me, if you're lying to yourself if you're saying this is not a bad look for AEW, that one of their major players from the beginning is gone and is likely going to leave. So anyway, thanks so much. See you guys soon. Bye-bye.